there was a universal language, number, symbolism, and form. And these are the things that we all use on a daily basis without ever really pondering the fact that there's actually deep symbolism hidden within them. I'm going to be showing you examples of this so that you can see for yourself what actually the universal language of geometry and symbolism actually means. We measure our life in terms of days, of 24 hours, referred to as a tropical or solar day. And it turns out that 24 of these hours are 1,440 minutes. This is one of the key numbers within the ancient canon of numerical cosmology that the ancients used to basically design and create their world. The 1,440 minutes equates to 86,400 seconds. If you just listen to these numbers, look at them, and let them kind of soak into your brain. Once you've gotten into this as actually a system, a methodology of transmitting information, these numbers are actually carriers of information because each number stands for meanings beyond just the apparent ones. So we see 1,440 minutes is equal to 86,400 seconds, and a 12-hour span of time, which is usually represented on the clock, 720 minutes, which equals 43,200 seconds. Just look at those numbers. You'll think that obviously 43,200 is half of 86,400. The 1,440, we're going to encounter that number again. So these are just examples of some of the time measures, how we think about time in our particular culture. Space measure, we talk about a foot, we talk about of 12 inches, we talk about a square foot, and you'll notice that the square foot has the same repetition of digits, 144, as the 24 hours does. All we do is we tack a 0 on that, and we have the number of minutes in a day. 144 square inches. Now it turns out that if you ever read the book of Revelations, which I highly recommend if you're interested in symbolism and esoterica, the book of Revelations talks about the holy city, which was revealed to St. John the Divine in a vision on the mountaintop. And a man with a measuring line reveals to him this vision of the holy city. And the holy city is described as having a wall around it, and the wall is described as being 144 cubits. That number is preserved in the scriptural writings. We have a cubic foot equaling 1728. I want to call your attention to the 1 square yard, which is 1,296 inches. As it turns out, we could stick a 0 on the end of that, and we have 12,960 years, which turns out to be an awesomely important span of time in terms of some of the great cycles that affect this planet. Geometry, everybody knows that a circumference of a circle is divided into 360 degrees, and that 360 degrees of arc, because each degree is subdivided into minutes of arc. There is then 60 times 360, as it says there, 21,600. And then you'll notice the 21,600 minutes of arc equals 1,296,000 seconds of arc. That's a mighty fine subdivision of a circle that would be used mostly by astronomers to measure the motion of distant stars. But notice that number, 1,296,000, and you'll see that it's the same number, just raised by 3 orders of magnitude as the number of square inches in a square yard. Now, another thing you might notice about most of these numbers from 1440 to 8640, 43,200, 144, 1728, 36, 1296 is that they all Kabbalistically add up and reduce to the single digit 9. Notice that, all of them. Pick any one of them, other than, say, with the exception of 24, but 1440 adds and reduces to a single digit 9. 1296, you'll notice the same thing. 1 and 2 and 9 and 6 is 18, which adds to a 9. Here we have the alphabet of sacred geometry, and these are the simplest forms. These are the polygons. You have a circle, which is actually not a polygon, but we have an equilateral triangle, a square, and a pentagon. And each of these can be measured by the number of degrees that determine the angles of the sides. So for example, we look at a circle, which is just a special case of an ellipse with eccentricity of 0. We've covered this already, so let's go right to the equilateral triangle, and we'll see it's 60, 60, and 60, which equals 180 degrees. Again, notice that we've got the number 9 recurring. We go to the square, which is 4 times 90 degrees. The total number of degrees defining the square is 360, the same as the circle, the same as the measure of a circle. And we measure the polygons by essentially measuring the angles of the vertices or the corners. Then likewise with the pentagon, each of the angles between successive edges is 108 degrees. So you multiply the 108 times 5 and you get 540. Again, notice, everything adds up to 9. If you take 25,920 seconds and set each second corresponding to 1 year, you'll discover it's exactly 432 minutes. 25,920 hours in turn is 1,080 days. And 25,920 days is equal to 72 years in the sacred calendar, which is interesting because I think most determinations of the average human lifespan right now in history is about 72 years. In the Vedas, they had various ways of encoding references to numbers. Let the Brahman hear the praise we utter. This hast the four-horned buffalo emitted. 4 are his horns, 3 are the feet that bear him, his heads are 2, his hands are 7 in number. Notice 4, 3, 2, raised to the 7th power gives you the number of years in the ancient Vedic time span, the kalpa, 4,320,000,000 years, which I find to be suspiciously close to the modern estimate for the age of the universe, or the age of the earth rather, which is about 4.5 billion years. And this is probably some of the oldest writings extant where this canon of numerology is presented. In the Vayu Purana, we find verses like this: 360 years according to the human calculation, constitute 1 divine year. Wise people know that there are 4 yugas in Bharatavarsa. The first one is Kreta, then follow Treta, Dvapara, and Kali. They have another, the Vedas recognize as a sacred year that they call, or a divine year, which is 360 of our years. Now here's a tabulation of the Vedic ages. And you'll notice, we'll look first at the total in human years, and we see that the Kali Yuga, the shortest, is 432,000. Notice the number that the Vedic ages begins with. 432,000 is the same number that the Sumerian king list ends with. So it's almost as if we have 2 different traditions, but one system. So you see how these same numbers are recurring over and over again. And I know that for a lot of people, first time they are confronted with this kind of information, sometimes it's almost too mind-boggling. You're going, what the heck does all these numbers mean? It's just too many numbers to sort out. But what you realize once you start studying them is that each one of them is kind of a mnemonic, because each number has a whole collection of phenomena that's associated with it. And here is a Gothic cathedral. This is the portal of judgment at Chartres. You'll notice that there are 4 carvings, 4 bas-reliefs around the figure of Christ seated within the mandorla, or also the vesica piscis. The 4 are representing the 4 ages of the world, the 4 seasons of the great year. So there you have the 4 seasons of the great year, each separated, representing a cycle of 6,480 years for each of those 4 seasons. Now, this had more than merely academic interest to ancient cultures, because it was believed, and I will show you here, that modern science, unbeknownst to the scientists who are actually doing the work, they're confirming the reality of these ancient measures of cyclical time and what their significance is. But in this case, again, we have the 4 seasons of the great year, giving us total duration for each of the 4 of 6,480, which, if you now recall, should bring to mind the image of the dodecahedron whenever you think of the number 6,480, the 12 pentagonal faces. Symbolically, each of those 12 faces to the Platonists, the Pythagoreans, and the Neoplatonists was associated with one of the 12 signs of the zodiac. The pentagon, of course, is the human figure. Think of the Vitruvian man, the Da Vinci man in the circle with 5 extremities and your 5 fingers on each hand. The fact that the pentagon manifests the golden section geometry, and we as humans are actually the highest mathematical expression, biological expression of the mathematics of the golden section, which relates us intimately to the geometry of the pentagon and the dodecahedron. What I've got here is evidence for advanced geodetic knowledge in archaic times. What is geodesy or geodetic knowledge? Geodesy is the determination of the size and the shape of the earth. Early in the 19th century, such knowledge was acquired by extensive land surveying and triangulating over large tracts of the earth's surface. Since the 1970s, orbital satellites have provided the most accurate picture of the Earth's exact size and mass distribution. Any advanced comprehension of the larger picture of our planet as a suitable abode for the evolution of higher life requires knowledge of its size and shape. The total mass, of course, determines g, the gravitational constant. The equatorial bulge is an integral component of the forces acting to impose rotation and orbital stability on Earth as it wheels about the sun. The relevance of these two basic factors to the evolution of life cannot be underestimated. Ancient master builders understood Earth's fundamental geodetic parameters on a level not equaled until the advent of modern satellite surveys. How do we know that? Well, probably the most salient means we have of knowing that is the Great Pyramid of Cheops itself. And there's been lots and lots of speculation about what the form or what the function of the Great Pyramid was. Some of it to me is pretty out there. Some of it I think is pretty abstract and speculative. What I've always thought does make the most sense and has the greatest credibility is the pyramid is essentially a model of the Earth. Ancient writings, Semitic writings, and I'm coming with two examples here. The Hebrew ancient writings, which would be Kabbalistic writings, the Hebrew Old Testament, the Torah, and then the Greek alphabet. The New Testament was written in Greek, all of the Pythagorean and Neo-Pythagorean literature written into Greek. Well, as it turns out, both of those languages, this was prior to the advent of the Hindu-Arabic numeral system. The Hindu-Arabic numeral system is when we came up with what we now have is we have our alphabet and we have our set of numbers. And they're two different things. But prior to the advent of the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, in the Semitic languages, the same symbols that were letters were also numbers. And the key was what you see right here, called a denary system. So Aleph was 1, Bet was 2, Gimel was 3, Dalet was 4, He was 5, Waw was 6, Zayin 7, and so on, down to Resh, Shin, and Tau, 200, 300, and 400. Yud, which was considered the seed of the Hebrew alphabet, had the value of 10. So units, tens, and hundreds. Then there was a symbolic component to each of the, for example, Aleph originally was the word for an ox. And Bet was originally the word for house. Gimel, originally the word for camel, and so on. Then we get to the Greek system, and it's also a denary system, units, tens, and hundreds. So alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, digamma, zeta, eta, theta, etc., 1 through 9. Then iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, pi, kappa, 10 through 90, and so on. Okay, so we have the same system, units, tens, and hundreds. So how is this employed? Well, here's an example. Here's aletheia, which was the Greek word for truth. And if you add up the eta, the alpha, the lambda, the eta, theta, epsilon, iota, and alpha, based on the values that I just showed you, the total value is 72. And that's one of our key sacred numbers. Katabala, which means conception, the first moment of creation. Kappa, alpha, tau, alpha, beta, omicron, lambda, eta. Take the values again directly from the historically authenticated table that I showed you, and they add up to 432. So there you see these numbers showing up here. Yerushalayim, or Jerusalem. Iota, epsilon, rho, omicron, upsilon. This would be the Greek spelling in the New Testament. Sigma, alpha, lambda, eta, and mu. There's the values of the individual letters. Iota, which was 10, epsilon, 5, etc. And when you add those up, you get 864. The Temple of Immortality. So if we take that spelling, add it up, it also is 864. The Holy Ghost, Toahian Pneuma. Add up the value of those and you get 1080. The Fountain of Wisdom, Pegasophias, also adds to 1080. Probably you're all familiar with things like, here is wisdom, let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, 666. You ever heard that? Probably the most famous and controversial number out of the Bible, 666. Well, if you want to understand what that is actually referring to, you have to peel back the outer literal representation of these tales and look at the underlying mathematical architecture, because that's where it's concealed. And it actually turns out that the orbital velocity of the Earth around the sun is 66,600 miles per hour, exactly. Again from the book of Revelations, and I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount of Zion, which to anybody who's versed knows that that's a reference to the sign of Aries, the lamb. And with him 144,000, which is this number right here, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. What does that mean? Well, it means that somebody who studies sacred geometry, eventually you've got these numbers as such an integral part of your consciousness in your forehead, in your frontal lobe, your waking consciousness, that these numbers literally become a part of the way you experience reality and experience the world, because the numbers are all around us in the world. It gives a shape to the world. It defines the periods of time that governs the cycles of our life. And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sung, as it were, a new song before the throne and before the four beasts. What are the four beasts? The bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man. That divides the cosmic wheel into periods of 6,480 years, which I certainly should add, because that's an important number. So there's a veiled reference to that cycle of time, 6,480. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. Now, when you get into Kabbalistic studies, you can go to the English translations to lead you into the outer portals. But if you want to get into the inner teaching, you've got to go beyond that, and you've got to go back to the original languages. And I'm not going to get too much into that, but the word redeemed is actually a very interesting word. It's talking about the redeemed of the earth, 144,000. We discovered that the word was agorazo, from agora, and it means to go to market. So basically what it's saying is that those who achieve salvation at the day of judgment are those who go out and go shopping. What's the connection with going to market? Well, as a place, properly the town square, that should be the first clue, the square. See, there's your geometry. As a place of public resort, by implication, a market or thoroughfare. So the idea first is the idea of a square, because the marketplace would be built around a square, a literal square. So it became associated with the idea of people gathering within this square. Go to market, by implication, to purchase, especially to redeem. This is the idea of collecting within the square again, right? Well, thinking now about metaphorically collecting one's faculties, but also to waken or to rouse literally from sleep, from sitting or lying, from disease or death, or figuratively from obscurity or ruin. It means to awake, to lift up, to raise up, to rear up. So see, all of these ideas are what you're led to once you start going into the original Kabbalistic meanings of the language. The authors of these sacred writings were really trying to get to, because you've got to remember that all of these sacred writings have gone through multiple layers of translation by people who may or may not have understood the original doctrines that were concealed in there symbolically and mathematically. The reference to singing a new song suggests to me that possibly we're talking about a change in frequency involving life here on earth, and that those who change their consciousness accordingly will be in harmony with the changing frequencies. And I believe that that is one of the core teachings of this, is that as Earth goes through its evolutionary journey through the galaxy, through varying geometric relationships with the astronomical universe, what is happening is that the frequencies impinging upon the Earth are constantly going through an evolution as well. And part of understanding the ancient secrets or methods of the master builders of old was utilizing the sacred geometry and the geodetic knowledge to create structures that resonated with the earth, because they were harmonically attuned to the earth. I think that's part of what's going on in trying to understand the sacred science behind structures like the Parthenon and the Great Pyramid and many of the other temples, is this science of harmony, of the science of resonance, and creating structures that vibrated according to certain frequencies, and those frequencies would be attuned to the slowly changing frequencies of the earth itself as it goes on its cosmic journey through the universe. One of the implications of this, it follows from this truth. The truth is that we humans are ultimately designed according to the cosmic measure. We were created in the image of God, right? And God is the ultimate cosmic measure. And we, being created in the image of God, embody the cosmic measures. So when Protagoras said man is the measure of all things, what he was implying is that we are the ultimate yardstick for the cosmos. In fact, when one looks at the scale of phenomena, from the human up to the largest macro scale that we know of, and from the human down to the smallest micro scale we know of, where are we within that hierarchy? Right smack in the middle. So there's as much above us as there is below us. There's as much greater than us as there is lesser than us. And I think that's one of the implications of this, is that when we begin looking at our sacred geometry, we realize it's the ultimate fusion of all of these phenomena on all scales, and the ultimate component, or the ultimate symbol of all that fusion, is we ourselves. And then, of course, ultimately it's our consciousness, because, like I said, with his name written in our forehead, what that means is that when you study sacred geometry, you're literally building an edifice in your consciousness. You're building a form out of the material of your own conscious mind that reflects this order of nature, of cosmic nature that's all about us. And that's the power, and why study of sacred geometry can ultimately be a key to accessing lots of other things like the Kabbalah and the alchemy and the Hermetic wisdom and the Gnostic traditions and the traditions of the Vedas and so forth.